We are now in the NFC South, the best division in football. But being in the best division in football isn't necessarily a good thing. And because of that, the Carolina Panthers, the New Orleans Saints, and the Atlanta Falcons may have already taken themselves out of the running of a number one seed. Brendan Albert is here. I am Adrian Fecchio. What do you think about that statement?
I think that's totally fair. I mean, here's one thing people will got to remember. Last year, there was only one division with teams that won multiple or double-digit games. That was the NFC South.
Mm.
3 of the teams won multiple or double-digit games. No other division had more than 10-plus games for 2 teams in the division. So, Adrian, your comment is 100% right. If any of these teams somehow go 4-2 in the division, you win the division. Pretty much straight up, that's how it's going to work out.
And when I say, like, worst division in football to be in, obviously, tough schedules, but put it into perspective. The Patriots are going to go 5-1, 6-0 in the AFC East.
Yep.
Who's going 4-2 in the AFC South, or NFC South, I should say? Is anybody? I mean, maybe you beat up on Tampa Bay twice, but 4-2, that's going to be really, really tough for any of these teams.
100% right. I mean, you're exactly right, Adrian. You have to sweep the Bucs. That's a must. And then you essentially can say, can we split with the other two? I don't think that's a complete farce, but the other thing too is every other team has that same mindset too. You know, this is one of those divisions for years it would go first to worst, first to worst, first to worst, because the division was so freaking tight.
Mm-hmm. And now we're just seeing top heavy, and then everyone's just beating up on the Bucs.
Yeah, exactly right.
But basically, being in the NFC South, it takes you away from going 13-3, 12-4. You're going to go like 11-5 instead and be a 2 seed, potentially, maybe, but most likely a 3.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, obviously we have the Packers, you know, who you put Rodgers in the mix. Rodgers is going to win you 5 games, in my opinion, more than you should.
Yeah.
I mean, just alone, there's 5 games. Then, of course, you have the Eagles, who I think are leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of the competition in the division. So right there, those are 2 that you kind of have fast-tracked, if you will. You go to the West. I mean, the West is kind of pretty tight, I would say. But then, again, the NFC South, all 3 of these teams are fantastic.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the Saints, and let's talk about them a little bit. You remember a couple years ago, they traded Jimmy Graham, a move that was not popular in New Orleans. But the Saints knew that if they were going to win a Super Bowl again, they had to get better defensively. And that was part of that start of the transformation here in New Orleans. So you trade Jimmy Graham, you get Max Unger back along with some draft picks, and they have finally started to turn the corner defensively. What do you think about this defense now?
You're 100% right, Adrian. I mean, we went from the Saints being the NFL's worst defense ever. And this was also a team then who was part of the Bounty Gate and won a Super Bowl. So you talk about this defense, you talk about them just rocking the pendulum, going back and forth, back and forth. It helps, though, when you get a stud all-pro corner in the draft like they got last year. That makes your life a lot easier. And then they made 2 first-round picks, move up to get Davenport, which I think was a need for them. I think it was a little rich to trade up that much for him. I would have rather them sit back and then done some other things, but I also understand the need because, again, if you're in New Orleans, the window for winning a Super Bowl is very thin. Drew Brees maybe has 3 more years tops is my guess. So I understand why they're saying, hey, let's try to win a Super Bowl right now.
Yeah, and let's get into Brees right now. Obviously, accuracy, anticipation, that's his game. NFL record, 72% completion percentage, but a lot of that, obviously, there's a lot of dump-offs and Alvin Kamara in the passing game. So that's like, you know, one of the reasons why his completion percentage is high. It's high every single season. 39 years old now. He's never had the biggest arm in the world. This is when Peyton Manning started to take that downturn. We'll see if Drew Brees suffers the same fate.
The one thing I will say about this, Drew Brees has Sean Payton. And yes. I would say Sean Payton arguably is one of the greatest offensive minds ever. I don't think Payton's ever had an offensive mind, at least in my opinion, that was equal to Sean Payton around him. So his coaching staff is a better job of surrounding him. Also, big difference here. When Drew Brees is starting to get older, what do the Saints do? Let's have 2 stud running backs now. They have an Ingram and Kamara. And we saw a big drop down in touchdowns from Drew Brees last year, which is a large reason we saw the big improvement in the run game. So New Orleans is doing it the right way. They're managing that downgrade of Drew Brees that happens to all of us as we get older, and in comes Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah. Yeah, and, you talked about less touchdowns. That's okay because that run game took the pressure off his back. Top 5 run game in 2017. So we've got Reggie Bush and Pierre Thomas back in New Orleans.
Something like that. I would just take these two guys more than those two.
Alvin Kamara is the guy that Reggie Bush was supposed to be.
Bingo. Oh, that's 100% fair. Let me ask you this, Adrian. When you think of Reggie Bush and the Saints, is there a singular play that you remember him about? Because there's one for me.
Sheldon Brown lighting him up.
Decapitated him. I literally thought he was decapitated on that swing pass, man. He was unbelievable. Unbelievable play there. But anyway, let's stick with the South and not get into our Eagles bias.
Well, I guess maybe my Eagles bias. You're a Ravens fan. You're not an Eagles guy.
Fair enough.
You don't have to say you're an Eagles guy. It's okay. It's all right. All right. Let's get into Kamara just a little bit more because he's the new trend of running back. I'm not gonna lie. I wasn't high on him last year.
Neither was I. Not at all.
I completely whiffed on him. His emergence has changed the way I think about running backs now.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's not many running backs that you have in the NFL that can be a starting running back and also can start for you in return and then go and play in the slot. And he's still pretty powerful back in the goal line. He's extremely rare. I mean, obviously a guy like Saquon Barkley is probably in that same conversation there as well. And then obviously you could probably throw in Zeke and Christian McCaffrey. But Alvin's ability to catch the ball out of the backfield and return kicks is so rare. His ability is unbelievable, and he's going to take a big step forward. But I caution the Saints, and I think they'll do this too. They're not just going to suddenly give him 250 carries this year. They're still going to make sure Ingram gets fed the ball to, who's in a contract year, might I add, and see how things go. Be curious to see how that return of Ingram comes back once he's done with his suspension.
Yeah, he's a guy with just incredible balance, man, and he's a lot stronger than I thought he was. The balance is really surprising to me. He might have the best balance of any back in the league.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair one. I mean, you talk about, him being this emergence. He was very close to not being here. Like, let's not forget, he went to Bama and got caught in the mix of all the 5-star players, and that happens. Had to go to a junior college, then eventually came to Tennessee. And even coming out of Tennessee, he wasn't a lock. A lot of people said, maybe he's a third-down gadget guy. Turns out, no, this dude's an all-pro. So this was not a complete slam dunk. And then obviously you go to an offense again with Sean Payton and Drew Brees. They're going to find ways to make your good be great.
Yeah. Michael Thomas, we know about him, some of the strongest hands in the NFL, really physical, good after the catch. So we know he's one of the top echelon guys at wideout, but are the rest of the receivers good enough in New Orleans?
Cameron Meredith was an interesting situation. This was a guy who caught almost 60 receptions, if I remember correctly, when he was in Chicago, got hurt. Chicago offered to decline the match, which really surprised me when the Saints – so the Saints are getting a guy who is young. Just his last time he actually touched the football field for a full season, had 60 receptions. That's pretty darn good. And say what you want about Ted Ginn, he never lived up to the first-round hype. But you put him in the slot and you tell him to run straight, and he can do that pretty darn well.
He's been sneaky good the last 5 years. Sneaky okay.
I think it just comes down to what's your expectation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I think about the same thing people always had with Deshaun Jackson. They're he's going to catch 100 receptions and have 8 touchdowns. No, Deshaun Jackson might have 60 receptions on his best year, and his run after the catch might be through the roof. That's where Ted Ginn is. If you have the right expectations of Ted Ginn, then you probably like him a lot.
Yeah. All right, offensive line now. They've gotten really good on the line the last few years. Second in the NFL in yards per carry. Also second in sacks allowed. So you look at, both the running game and the passing game pretty strong. And you got Teron Armstead at left tackle when he's healthy. He's one of the more athletic tackles in the league. Brian Ramczyk at right tackle. He looks like he's on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
Max Unger, heart and soul of the line at center. And Larry Warford is back to being Larry Warford again.
Yeah, and then, of course, you have Andres Pete at the opposite guard position, who is a former tackle himself. So very good offensive line. But, again, when you have Drew Brees behind you, too, he can set the adjustments, set things. That's going to make a good offensive line become a great offensive line. So it's a very, very good offensive line, probably a top 5 offensive line in the league.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the defense. Aggressive, blitz-heavy scheme. Kind of looked like the Super Bowl defense that won it all in 2009. Not that it was the best in the world, but it was an opportunistic defense, an opportunistic secondary that had a lot of interceptions and turnovers, and that's how they won in 2009. They scored more points than you, and they got turnovers.
Yep, exactly. You don't necessarily have to be a defense that, lets up the fewest amount of points. If you give your offense more chances, sometimes that's even better. And that's really what New Orleans had been when they won the Super Bowl there. They bring in, as I mentioned, Davenport to be that opposite edge guy from of course, that Mr. Unsung Hero, who we're probably going to talk about a little bit later, as a underrated defensive end pass rusher there in Cam Jordan. And then you're saying, hey, linebacking crew, you guys have gotten significantly better over the years. They really have. They went from horrible to this is an above-average unit.
Yeah. And I want to get into what's his name? Cameron Jordan, obviously. Yeah. Cameron Jordan. So power player, he can rush the passer, stuff the run. What do you think of him?
I love him. I love Cam Jordan. I mean, he's just one of those guys that we don't talk about him enough, but he's consistently a guy who's in that double-digit sack situation, and it blows my mind that we don't talk about him more because he's almost a consistent Pro Bowler, but yet when we make these lists of pass rush guys, we next to never talk about him.
I bet New Orleans wishes that those 2 firsts they sent for Marcus Davenport, they wish they would have sent him to Oakland for Khalil Mack.
I agree.
How about that?
I agree with you.
Yeah. 2 firsts for Marcus Davenport. That's a little rich for me.
Well, again, it's this catch-22 because New Orleans is trying to build for the future while also win right now.
Yeah.
So you look at it, they traded a third for Teddy Bridgewater, who, when healthy, he could be the quarterback of the future there. So if you're telling me we trade a third-round pick for a quarterback succession plan and we have a young stud at running back, Alvin Kamara, and a stud receiver, Michael Thomas, I love that pick there and getting Teddy Bridgewater and letting him just sit and wait. And then you flip on the other side of the ball, you could say, well, if we wanted to trade those 2 ones and win right now, you're right, we probably could have done it with Khalil Mack. Or you could have said, let's roll the dice and try to get Davenport and hope he becomes a double-digit sack artist, and then all of a sudden our succession plan is really smooth and we're just consistently winning. I see both sides of the coin there, Adrian.
Yeah, that's a good point. Run defense, 28th in yards per carry. They add DeMario Davis. What do you think about that run D?
DeMario Davis, I'm glad you brought him up, Adrian. Does a great job there at that Mike Backer position.
He does.
He's a huge help there for New Orleans. Manti Te'o, a guy who has never lived up to his hype. I mean, when you're hyped up as a Heisman candidate and then you go in the NFL, you're just the only way you can live up to the hype is being all pro. And that's Manti's never going to be that. He's never going to be a Pro Bowl guy either, but he'll be a good starting linebacker. I think it's a good linebacking crew in the NFL for the Saints here.
Yep. Where do you got the Saints at?
I got them at 10-6. I think this is a very good team. They're a lot of fun to watch on offense, but 10-6 I think is respectable, especially in a tough division.
Yeah. I've got 11-5. They are the only team I have winning 11 games in the division. So I am higher on the Saints than the Falcons and Panthers. So there you go. All right, let's move on to Atlanta. They fall from 1st to 15th in scoring, 2nd to 8th in yardage. Balance issues, they had 30 drops. I believe that led the NFL. Matt Ryan had an 849-yard drop-off, a 47% decrease in touchdown passes, and a 71% increase in interceptions. That's the difference between Kyle Shanahan and Steve Sarkisian.
Massive. I mean, massive is an understatement about the big turnaround. Adrian, you just labeled it so well in depth there about how poorly the Falcons struggled. They also went to a huge margin difference in the turnover differential, which is a big factor too, and why they kind of struggled. The one thing I will say, though, Adrian, they did kind of catch fire late. They did start to come into their own. They did start to play a little bit better later. So now you're hoping that momentum can carry over and be the Falcons of the back 8 games, not the first 8 games.
The problem is obviously, if you remember last year, the red zone. I believe they were 23rd in red zone efficiency. And I believe they led the NFL during their Super Bowl season that they got there. I believe. Is that right? Do you remember?
I think they're in that mix, yeah.
Yeah. So you can see the differences right there. Matt Ryan, what are your thoughts on him? Do you like him as a quarterback? Do you think he's a little overrated? What do you say?
I think he's in that mix of the guys of like the Derek Carr, the Andrew Lucks when healthy. I think he's in that mix. I think you have like a really top tier of now it's Rodgers and Brady, and then you have a bit of a drop off, and then you'd have a guy like Russell, Drew Brees, Carson Wentz certainly is ahead of those other guys I just mentioned. And then there's a whole bunch of guys that I kind of think kind of roller coaster. I'm not ready to go as far as our boy in Jacksonville saying he's overrated. But I'm also not going to say that he's anything less than a top 12 quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah. I think I have him like 7th or 8th in my rankings. I don't have them on me though. But whatever. Nobody cares about my rankings. Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman. What do you think about that duo? They're pretty good.
I love them. I really do. Besides New Orleans, I think this is the best 1-2 punch in the NFL. I'm a huge Tevin Coleman fan. We'll talk more about him later. Devontae Freeman, small guy, but he is powerful. Does a great job of making defenders miss in space. Both of these guys can catch out of the backfield. I, Adrian, personally think that this is the best skills group in the NFL as far as tight ends, receivers, running backs. I think this is the deepest group in the NFL.
I would not necessarily disagree with you, but can Steve Sarkisian utilize all those pieces properly? I mean, they pick up Calvin Ridley in the draft.
Yeah, free money.
Yeah, Julio Jones. But here's the thing about Julio Jones. Last year, 6th in targets, 2nd in yards. Do you know how many touchdowns he had?
Only because I looked this up. He had 3 touchdowns last year.
3!
That's not what you expect from Julio Jones, man.
3!
I mean, you talk about red zone woes. How does Julio Jones only have 3 touchdowns? I mean, Mohamed Sanu led the team with 5, and I like Sanu. I don't want to make it twisted and make it sound like I'm talking bad about Sanu. But if you're arguably the best receiver in the NFL, how do you only have 3 touchdowns?
I have no idea. Now, this has been a dilemma of his, actually, his entire career in terms of being a double-digit guy. He doesn't reach it often. I think he's only reached it like once or twice or something.
Mm-hmm.
But 3? Not acceptable.
It's unacceptable. I mean, if you want to be, argued as one of the greatest of all time, you need to get in the end zone more. I mean, there's no doubt his athletic ability, and he'll go these weeks, Adrian. Well, he'll have like 4 receptions for 80 yards, and then he'll have a week with like 6 receptions for like 270 and 2 touchdowns, and it's just unbelievable. But then that happens like a meteor. You see it like once a year, and that's it. Yeah. But his high is better than any receiver's high in the NFL when he's really cooking.
Yeah. All right, let's get on to the offensive line. I think the tackles are pretty underrated. Jake Matthews, especially Ryan Schrader. Alex Mack still doing it at center. You got Andy Levitre still. O-line's okay.
O-line gets it done. Not much to talk about here. They're enough not to hurt you. They're not enough to be a complete dominant offensive line, but they're enough to get the job done.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the defensive side of the ball. This is a unit that I think is very fast and very physical and very underrated too. 8th-ranked defense last year. You guys may not know that.
Most people don't. Now, here's the big issue for Atlanta. Atlanta, when they went to the Super Bowl, was plus 11 in the turnover margin. Last year was minus 1, which finished them in the low 20s. Massive drop-off there. They got to get more takeaways. The other big issue that they had, they're losing 9.5 sacks on Adrian Claiborne. Now, Claiborne had what, Adrian? 4 sacks on Byron Bell against the Cowboys, right? So, that's one game there. I get it. But you lose 9.5 sacks. That's 9.5 sacks. Vic Beasley came down to earth a little bit. Tack McKinnon, their first-round pick, had six sacks last year, which is pretty darn good. Those 2 guys really need to increase that. Both of them need to be at minimum 8 sacks this year.
Vic Beasley went from 15 and a half to 5.
Yeah. I shouldn't have said come down to earth. It was like a meteor. I mean, it was just a freaking missile coming straight down, man. I take that back.
So what happened with him? How did those numbers go so far down? Now, I know he's a guy that really struggles against the run. So, or I don't know. What happened with him?
I mean, I wish I could tell you, Adrian. I'm not even going to act like I know. But when you go from that drastic, my first assumption is, were you not playing healthy all year? Because 10 sacks is ridiculous.
Yeah.
1 or 2 is like, okay, that's fine. 10 sacks is something you see when a guy maybe just isn't healthy. That's my blind assumption here.
Mm-hmm. Do you like Tack?
I do like Tack. Yeah, I like Tack McKinney there too. Yeah. I think this is a good young edge pressure group here. I like Grady Jarrett a lot too in the interior. Be curious what they do with his contract negotiations coming up. So defensive line, they got 3 young guys, but I think all 3 of these guys can certainly make a difference.
You know who I really like? Deion Jones.
Deion Jones, man. Dude's a missile.
Yeah, really, really fast, dude.
Sideline to sideline, one of the quickest linebackers in the NFL. He's consistently one of the guys that's highest in tackles for the season because he gets sideline to sideline. He's so freaking fast. They drafted Duke Riley at LSU. He kind of struggled a little bit last season, but his speed is certainly noticeable too. As you talked about, Adrian, it's certainly one of the fastest defenses in the NFL, and the linebacking crew shows it.
Yeah, they got Devondre Campbell as well. He started as a rookie 2 years ago. Last year, he's okay. He's average, whatever. All right, moving on to the secondary. So we know how good Desmond Trufant is. But on the other side, Robert Alford had a quietly really good season. They target him a lot because you're not going to target Trufant a lot. And Alford did a solid job, I thought.
I think so too. Yeah, very underrated corner here. Let's not forget, he also picked off Brady in the Super Bowl, and that was a big thing. It looked like it carried over into all of next season. Then you go to the third and even the fourth defensive backs here. They added in Isaiah Oliver out of Colorado. That was another found money situation. Like, oh, he's still on the board? Yeah, why don't you come down to Atlanta and play for us? I like Bleedy Wilson a lot too as the other corner from UConn. This is a pretty deep defensive back room. Now, you never know what the injury bug's going to happen, but as far as corners go, this is a very, very good defensive backs.
Yeah, and then just to touch on the safeties, Keanu Neal, another violent safety. I mean, just violence on this defense, fast and physical. Again, going back to that, Keanu Neal is a good one.
It's awesome to see, like, the thumbprint of Seattle defenses pretty much everywhere you go. Like, there's someone that, like, you look here in Seattle, it's Cam Chancellor, right? You go to Atlanta, then it's Keanu Neal. How about San Diego? They got Derwin James. Like, there's these, like, big, clear, physical, strong safeties who are there to be enforcers in the run game and are physically able to match up with more, beefed up tight ends that can move a little bit.
Yep. All right, where do you got the Falcons at? I got 10-6.
I actually have the Falcons win the division at 11-5. I like the Falcons' defense a little bit more than the Saints, which is why I have them just ahead of the Saints. But I think all 3 of these teams, if they goes the other way, I'm not surprised.
I'm with you. To me, it's Falcons or Saints. And I think Carolina is going to be the third team, the third wheel. And we'll get to them right now. So gone is Mike Shula, the offensive coordinator who was there since 2013. He gets replaced by Norv Turner. Do you like this move?
I guess. I mean, we'll see. I mean, look, I think Atlanta has all the weapons here. Atlanta in a couple years is going to be like how we looked at the Bengals in the early 2010s when we said, man, this team is loaded. How are you not winning a Super Bowl here? Atlanta's in a very similar situation. They are absolutely loaded.
So touch back on Atlanta. If Steve Sarkisian wasn't the offensive coordinator, I would probably have them winning the division.
I think that's fair. I mean, look, let's put it this way. If they still had Shanahan, Super Bowl.
I'd probably pick them to win the Super Bowl.
I mean, that's fair. So, like, I have confidence that they're going to figure it out, that they've used this offseason to figure it out and are going to make this transition fluid.
And that could very well happen. Definitely not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, you're on to something there. So, all right. Now we will move to Carolina. We talked about Norv Turner a little bit.
Sorry, I got excited about talking about the Falcons. I jumped backwards.
It's okay. So Cam Newton now. So talk about jumping backwards. Won the MVP 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And he's followed that up with the 2 worst quarterback rating seasons of his career.
Man, Cam was like a meteor. The funniest thing about it, too, is when Cam won his MVP is when he didn't have his number one receiver who turned out the number one receiver hated him the whole time. But that's neither here nor there. This offense is getting very, very good. The weapons around him. I love the draft pick of Moore. Curtis Samuel is a gadget guy. He can do enough in the slot to help you. Obviously, we saw a big jump there in Funches. Greg Olsen, Christian McCaffrey. Cam Newton has the weapons around him. There's no reason he shouldn't step right back up and be at the MVP level form.
Is Christian McCaffrey one of those potent weapons? Do you like him?
Oh, I love him.
Okay.
I mean, I absolutely love Christian McCaffrey. But at the same time, he's not going to be a guy that's going to carry the ball 20 times. He's
No.
probably going to carry it like 14, 15, have like 3 or 4 receptions and 1 or 2 kick returns. He's going to do it a little bit everywhere, very similar to how Alvin Kamara does. But Alvin Kamara can stay so much more fresh because you have Mark Ingram that can power the ball. Brought in C.J. Anderson to kind of carry some more of those yuck yards, some of those nasty things to keep those legs fresh on Christian McCaffrey, which I totally get. But I still think he's an absolute dynamic weapon, Adrian.
Here's what I will say, and here's where the Turner acquisition might be beneficial, and I think it could be beneficial for Christian McCaffrey in the passing game.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think this is a guy who we could absolutely see being 50-plus receptions. I don't think we're ever going to see another 100 level guy like we saw in Marshall Faulk. I just don't think that players have that durability anymore. Yeah. But I certainly can see this guy easily being a 50-plus reception guy.
He had 80 last year.
Easy, yeah. I mean, I think I should have said this and take this back. When I say 50, I'm talking about McCaffrey averaging 50 for his career because I could see him – let's say worst-case scenario. Yeah. Maybe he starts to get a little more, dinged up at the running back. He can move to the slot full-time. No problem. No problem. Become a full-time slot receiver and still average 50.
Yeah. All right. They made the move to trade Kelvin Benjamin midway through the season last year. So that allowed Devin Funchess, basically a Benjamin clone, to fulfill the number 1 spot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Open up the field for Curtis Samuel and Damiere Byrd. You talked about Samuel a little bit. Damiere Byrd's kind of like he's underrated, I guess, but nobody knows who he is. So that's why I'm saying he's underrated.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you add Samuel, I mean, he was a guy at Ohio State, and he came out. Was he a running back? Was he a slot receiver? What was he? He can do a lot of different things. I think they're going to use him a lot of way the Panthers were using Ted Ginn when he was there. Samuel kind of got dinged up last year. Didn't really see him at his full healthiest. I'm really curious to see where does he line up in the playbook. I could see him being one of those gadget wrinkle guys that the Panthers use for trick plays that you see on SportsCenter every now and then, and then all of a sudden you forget he plays, but then you see another highlight from him. I think that's where we're going to see him.
Yeah, and obviously I'm in agreement with you for DJ Moore. We were both very high on him leading into the draft, so that I like that pickup for them. Offensive line, I got a question for you. Would you rather have Trey Turner or Andrew Norwell?
Norwell.
They decided to pay Turner the money last year, and because of that, they had to let Norwell go this year. So they get Turner instead of Norwell. I'd rather have Norwell, but that's why I asked you the question.
I mean, I think the other thing we're saying here too is like in a bottle, yeah, I think I'd prefer Norwell. In a long term, I think Turner's probably 2 years younger, if I remember correctly. So I understand the foresight here of this.
Yeah.
I guess I can see that a little bit. Also, Turner's versatility. When he was in college, he also played a little bit of tackle. I don't remember Norwell ever playing tackle, but Turner at least there has a little versatility to make some things happen in the offensive line, interior, and if you really need him, he can slide outside.
Yeah. I'm trying to look up the ages here. Trey Turner is 24. Norwell went to Jacksonville, so
he did.
I'm going to say you're probably right on the 2 to 3 years. Because Norwell, I think, is like 26, 27. Norwell is blah, 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 as I keep talking, so there's no silence. 26, so 2 years. There you go.
Long term, yeah, I can understand why they make that move.
Yeah. An unfortunate situation where they lose Darrell Williams for the season, tore his ACL.
Yeah.
I got a question mark at tackle. And do they still have Matt? I think – is Matt Khalil still there?
Matt Khalil is still there. They just made a trade for Corey Robinson to bring him in because Matt Khalil looks like he's going to miss at least a couple of games just as he kind of gets fully healthy for the season. Yeah. So there is already another little question mark at the left tackle position. Obviously, we know about the right tackle position. There's a reason that I like the Falcons and the Saints more. I don't think the Panthers line is bad. I don't want to get it twisted. But I certainly think it can be a lot better, and I certainly think the Saints and the Falcons have better offensive lines.
I think what you're trying to say is the interior is solid, but the tackles suck.
I agree with that, yeah.
There you go. I say it in a non-PC manner. So there you go. I have no filter.
Not wrong. You're not wrong on anything you just said.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the defense. The defensive line. What do you think about this unit?
Man, when we look at this unit here, this is a really wacky one because Julius Peppers was a lead or among the team leads in sacks. And Julius Peppers isn't exactly young anymore. We're not talking about 2008 Julius Peppers. We're talking about 2018 Julius Peppers.
We're talking 38 years old, 17 years in the NFL.
Exactly. And while that's awesome, I also take that as a negative because I'm like, why is all of our sacks coming from a dude who's 38? Like, I look at that as a glass is half empty situation, while some people could say a glass is half full. So as far as, pressure, I have a knock on this, Adrian.
Yeah. So he had 10.5 sacks, as did Mario Addison, the other defensive end. Charles Johnson retired during the offseason, so he's not there anymore. Was he there last year anyway? I don't even remember already.
Yes, he was there, but didn't really do enough that it's really noticeable difference.
Yeah, obviously he's getting up there in age. Linebackers are still pretty good. Obviously, Luke Kuechly probably still the best in the game.
Yep.
Tom Davis getting up there in age. So again, it's like you got these old guys in the front seven.
Mm-hmm. And then of course Shaq on the opposite side. Yeah. I still think this is the best linebacking crew in the NFL. From three starters, best three starters in the NFL, in my opinion here. But the other thing we got to talk about here is not fun, but Luke Kuechly is starting to have a long line of history of concussions now. I think it's been like 3 seasons in a row where he's had one documented, and that's the key word there, of course, is documented concussions. And there's no doubt he's the best linebacker in the NFL when he's on the field, but your best ability is your availability.
Mm-hmm. All right, the secondary. I think it remains very suspect. James Bradbury is like, okay, I guess. But the rest of it, meh.
Yeah, this is a bad defensive back group. I think this is maybe the worst safeties in the NFL. I was saying this as soon as it happened. This is the team that made the most sense to go out and sign Eric Reed because he instantly is a starter. Their safeties are very, very poor. And I understand, his outspokenness maybe can ruffle some feathers, and I get that. But this was also a team who had their owner being outspoken and doing some really inappropriate things. They have a new ownership group. If I was an ownership group, your PR high is never going to be as high as it is right now. So if you're worried about a PR backlash of signing Eric Reed, do it now because your PR high is not going to last much longer. It comes 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks. I would have brought him in yesterday. It would have been a no-brainer in my mind.
Dude, that's the best point I've heard on Eric Reed all offseason. That's why you're on my fucking team.
Well, I appreciate that.
That's pretty good. That's awesome.
It's the truth, though. Like, I understand why some teams don't do it. I do. Like, I completely am understanding of players kneeling. I also understand the argument some people would make and say, look, you do have free speech, but you're also not prohibited from any repercussions of said free speech. So I understand all that. But the Panthers' new ownership group has a clean slate. Absolutely a clean slate. If they bring this guy in and it's ruffles some feathers, it's not like they're a PR nightmare, i.e. like the Houston Texans were there for a while when calling all their players inmates. That's not a situation that you probably want to bring that dynamic into. The Panthers make the most sense, and it just blows my mind because you make the most sense from a PR standpoint and you need the player the most, so why aren't you doing it?
Yeah. I've got Carolina at 9-7.
Same thing. I have Panthers finishing third here at 9-7, certainly in that wild card hunt as well.
Yeah. All right, last team in the division is Tampa Bay. We're not going to spend a lot of time on them because we already spent a bulk of the show actually spending on the first 3 teams. So I'll just ask you this. Jameis Winston, is he a bust?
Bust is a strong word, but he's not going to be the quarterback there for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
I should say, do you think he's going to be a bust?
I think he's going to be a bust, yes. When you're the number 1 overall pick, you're expected to be a Pro Bowler, period. That's absolutely the expectation. He had some good seasons, but if you look at his stats, decreased almost every single year. And you know what? Nothing in Tampa has gone right. The unfortunate thing for him is it's his own damn fault. If you look at most of the stuff that's gone on with him since college, it's been situations he's put himself into here. every now and then you see him on Hard Knocks and you're like, wow, this guy looks like he gets it. And I have friends who have worked and coached at Florida State and loved him. But it just seems like every single time we hear another dumb thing, it's like, look, where there's smoke, there's fire, and you never want to try to ding a person's character unless you really know them. But at the same time, if you keep hearing reports about inappropriate behavior, about immaturity, at what point are we just going to acknowledge, look, something here is true. Not everyone in the world is out to get you, man.
Yeah, I'm with you on the immaturity thing. The immaturity thing you can kind of easily overlook that because you're a college kid. It's like, I bought into the leadership qualities. I thought he had everything.
So did I. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I bought into everything. And then you just see how corny he became. When he ate that W.
That was the weakest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, let's eat. Like eating it like a crab leg.
I agree. Honestly, this was the team that I said needed to trade for Teddy Bridgewater the most, because I thought this was the team that of the GM, head coach, offensive coordinator, the entire staff, everyone is coaching for their jobs. So you need to win right now. So to that group, what's a draft pick in 3 years or 2 years or 1 year mean to them if they're not going to be there to take it? So that's why I said you guys make the most sense to trade for Teddy, let Teddy come out, let him battle with Jameis. And if Jameis flocks and Teddy looks good, maybe you save your jobs. Maybe they still make a trade for Brissett, coming out of the Colts. I still think that's a possibility here. But if I'm in the ownership group of Tampa, I know for a fact if we sit back and do nothing, we're all getting fired.
Yeah. Let's kind of run through a little bit the rest of the offense. Obviously, we know about Mike Evans. Comes off a disappointing season. Do you like Mike Evans?
I love Mike Evans. Ooh. I mean, again, he's a guy where I know what he's going to do. Here's the difference between him and Julio. I know he's going to get the touchdowns. He might not necessarily get the 70-yard big bomb run and catch and make guys miss. But I know in the red zone, all 6'5" or whatever Mike Evans is, he's going to get those touchdowns.
Yep. 5-year, $82.5 million extension. I thought it was a good extension to sign and give out for Tampa Bay. So you lock him up. They draft Ronald Jones out of USC. It looks like I would think he would be the starter as the season goes on. Maybe they don't start with him as the starter because Peyton Barber's listed as the starter on the depth.
And he looked really good. Peyton Barber's looked really good in the preseason too, to be fair.
Yeah. So I think over time it'll be Jones, but maybe I'm wrong.
They also drafted our boy Alex Kappa out of
dude. I should say this. I love their offensive line. Like I don't love it, but I love some of the guys. Like I shouldn't say I love their. How do I word this? I love some of the guys that they've picked up. Ali Marpet and
another one I like. Yep.
So it took me a long time to get it out, but basically they drafted an Ali Marpet clone in Alex Kappa.
I agree with you. And then this is another team that we might see more 12 personnel because they got two really good tight ends.
Yes,
of course, they have Cameron Brate there, but O.J. Howard, the first-round pick out of last year, which didn't live up to first-round hype, but typically first-round tight ends don't. There's a lot of weapons there around whatever the quarterback is. So this is a team that's really missing quarterback on offense, unfortunately, and I think we're going to see them drafting high because of it.
Yeah. 2 years ago, the Tampa Bay Bucks were kind of a surprise. They were 10-6, I believe, and the defense was a lot better than it is right now because last year, I've got numbers. I've got nuggets written down.
Here we go.
Dead last in total yards allowed, dead last in passing yards allowed, dead last in third down stops, blew leads in 3 games with under 3 minutes remaining last year.
Not where you want to be in any of those conversations.
No, not good.
I mean, there's a big reason they brought in Bo Allen and they brought in Vita Vea as a first-round pick, and they brought in old three fingers of JT to come on and wave on down there.
He's going to go eat the W with Jameis.
His W is a little easier to eat because there's only 3 fingers there. And then they brought in Vinny Curry. I mean, they completely redid their defensive line, and they still have a stud there in Gerald McCoy. Yep. So the defensive line, a lot of new faces, a lot of guys who I think best days are behind them. But if you're looking at saying, hey, maybe one of these guys can play what they used to be, then maybe the defensive line is actually pretty good.
Yeah, I still like the linebacking core. I like Quan Alexander. I like Levante David. I thought they might actually trade Quan Alexander during the offseason because just to get some extra draft capital. And he might be in his last year, I believe, if I'm right.
I think he's close to it. I know he's young, so he might be coming out of that first contract. But you're right, Adrian. Two very, very good linebackers there. Defensive backs, some big swings and misses, unfortunately, here. Vernon Hargreaves still has swung and a miss. The other thing that I really didn't like what they did was they drafted two defensive backs that were corners and essentially said, we're going to move you to safety. I'm like, okay, I get sometimes you need to do that, but you need help at corner too. It's not like, oh, our corners are good, so we need safeties. No, everything is bad here.
Yeah, and Brent Grimes is like 87 years old.
I'll give any of our listeners $1 if you can tell me in the first 5 seconds where Brent Grimes went to school.
I couldn't tell you. Shippensburg. See, I wouldn't have gotten that.
Yep,
I was going to guess like LSU or something.
You would guess. Not many people would guess PSAC Division II schools in Pennsylvania for NFL products.
Nope, not at all. All right, that's it on the 10.
That's enough, yeah.
We gave him a couple minutes. We gave him some time. Got 5-11.
Yeah, 5 wins. That's where they finished last year. That's what they're going to finish this year. I don't think they got any better, so it's hard for me to say that they got better when the rest of the division is still very good. 5 wins is where I have them.
You know what I forgot to ask in the beginning, and we talked about this? That open-ended question for the fans to answer. We forgot about it. Do you have an open-ended question?
Let's do this. When do you think Kirk Cutter is going to get fired?
After this year.
I'm going to say after 5 games.
Oh, okay.
5 games is my number.
Hot take.
Hot take. He's not going to – I mean, Vegas has odds. He's the highest odds-on favorite to get fired. Of first coach to get fired, odds-on favorite is Kirk Cutter.
I love it. He's definitely gone. Bye. See ya.
Yep.
All right, so now we get to the underrated, hot seat, all that good stuff. So who's underrated in the NFC South?
Underrated here. Telvin Coleman. I mean, everyone knows about Devontae Freeman, but Coleman's numbers aren't that much less. Yeah. And really, when you look at his averages, when he gets the ball in his hand, he can produce. Telvin Coleman's going to be on a contract year this year. I'm just saying this. I know running backs normally don't get paid heavily, but I could see the Falcons saying, you know what, we've already invested in Freeman. We're not going to invest in another back. We're going to let you go. If you're the Philadelphia Eagles and you have Jay Ajayi and you have Telvin Coleman on the market, which one would you rather, Adrian, honestly?
Ooh, that's hard because Ajayi's probably a better back, but obviously the injury issues.
Bingo, and that's why I would take Coleman all day over him.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm in agreement with you. Once again, of course I am, because you're smart.
Who's your underrated?
Yeah, I'm either going to go with Deion Jones or Robert Alford. Now, the reason why I say Deion Jones is because I think he's actually one of the better linebackers in the game. So that's why I think he's underrated, because I don't think most people would say he's underrated. I think most people would know who he is, but I think he's that good. The other guy is Robert Alford. We talked about him earlier. I think he took such a huge step in his progression last year, and he's become a really, really solid cornerback for them. So those are my two. I'll go with those two. All right, hot seat. I guess we kind of already gave it away. Dirk Cutter, huh?
Simple truth is, if you're wearing a Tampa Bay Buccaneers polo and on the sidelines this season, you were on the hot seat. Everyone there in the Tampa Bay facilities is 100% on the hot seat.
Oh, yeah. All right, fantasy player.
I like Chris Godwin. I think Chris Godwin's going to be the guy.
You know what? We should have talked about him because he's very underrated.
He's very underrated.
I think on my underrated. I should have put him on. See, we didn't focus on Tampa Bay, and I forgot about him.
That's why.
But that's why he's on the underrated list.
He's going to be the number 2 option there in Atlanta, Atlanta and Tampa. And I know people are going to be like, well, the Bucs just suck. You just completely told us the Bucs suck. And you know what? They do suck. But here's the reason why. You probably can get Chris Godwin at the very, very last round of your fantasy draft. You're not going to get many teams number 2 option that late in the draft. So I think Chris Godwin, I think he'd be a great fantasy stash player for you, especially if you're in a league that's maybe a dynasty or a keeper, and you stash him. Maybe in a year from now, that 17th pick probably should have been like a 10th pick in the next year's draft. I think he can be a sleeper stud.
I had him as a top 5 wide receiver last year, like heading into the draft. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you loved him. You were high on him.
Yeah. I don't get everyone right, but I got him right. So I missed out on Alvin Kamara, but I got him right. So just trying to keep it humble here. I'll also tell you when I fuck up. There you go.
Fair enough.
All right. Although I don't know if I'm really that humble. I'm kind of cocky and arrogant.
Love the honesty.
You know. All right. That's it. Oh, fantasy player for me. Do I really have one? I don't know. Who's my fantasy player? Not Julio Jones, I'll tell you that, even though I picked him with my 11th. Actually, you know what? I'll say this. I took him at 11, Julio Jones. So if you have him, if you have, like, the last pick in the first round and Julio Jones still on the board, you should probably take him.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that stops Julio from being better than AB is touchdowns, to be completely honest. Because if he got 5 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns, his production is going to be every bit as high as AB, and AB is going to go 6 or 7 picks before him.
Yeah, so I was the 11th pick in a 12-team draft. I went Julio with my first-round pick, and then I went Michael Thomas on the way back. So I went wide out, and then I just went and took a bunch of running backs. Like I took like 6 of them.
Took a whole bunch of flyers on like your Rashad Pennies and guys like that of the world. Yep.
Yeah. So just hoping it like I think it was Kenyon Drake. I took Royce Freeman. I took Ronald Jones, Rashad Penny. So that's like the strategy to take it. If you're a late round pick, late first round pick, you want to go wide out, and then just take a bunch of running backs.
Makes sense.
All right. That's it. That's our NFC South show. This is definitely the longest one we've done, but it's deserving of a long show because you got 3 teams that are very, very good. Well, 2 teams that are very, very good, and another that's like okay.
Fair enough.
There it is. That's Brendan Albert. I'm Adrian. Thank you. See ya.
Appreciate it.